Welcome to Chronicles Night. Tonight's story isn't about fame, it's about what fame takes from you. It's about Elvis Presley, the man who lit up stages across the world and slowly faded behind his own spotlight. He was crowned a king, but lived more like a prisoner, surrounded by fans, money, and noise, but never truly heard. This isn't a story about music. It's about silence, about what happens when the image becomes louder than the man. So if you've ever wondered what it really felt like to be Elvis Presley, stay with me. And if you're staying with me tonight, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. And what time your night begins. You wake up sweating. The air in Graceland is thick, still, and full of ghosts. Another day starts and you're already tired. Outside, someone is mowing the lawn just to say they were here. Inside, someone knocks, gently, always gently. Another assistant, another pill, another round of being Elvis Presley when you barely remember what that means. You sit up slow, body heavy, mind fogged. You don't know if it's the meds, the ears, or the weight of the name that keeps pressing down on your chest. You look around. Jungle wallpaper, sealed windows, stacked TVs, a bed big enough for 5 but empty except for you. This isn't a home. It's a museum you happen to be alive in. You're still the king, but you don't rule anything. The shows are booked without asking you. The songs are chosen for you. The lights go up and the machine kicks in. You stand on a stage in a white jumpsuit like armor, sweating under lights, holding a microphone that feels like an anchor. The crowd screams and you smile. Always smile. Even when you're half asleep, even when your stomach aches, even when your hands shake. That's what they want. The voice, the moves, the illusion. And you give it, because giving is all you've ever known. They started calling you Elvis with a capital E the moment you opened your mouth on Sun Records. The boy from Tupelo became a vessel. You weren't born to be a star. You were born into poverty, dirt floors, gospel choirs, your mama's soft voice, and your daddy's empty promises. All you ever wanted was to sing like you did in church, to feel that peace in your chest. But you sang with hips and the world lost its mind. Girls fainted, preachers raged, cameras rolled. And overnight, you were no longer allowed to be a boy. You were an idea. You were danger and desire, sin and salvation. And then came the contracts, the Colonel, the movies, the military, Vegas, the pills, the gold records mounted like trophies in a tomb. They bought your talent, then sold your soul in pieces, smiling all the while. They called you a king, but fed you like livestock. You weren't managed, you were owned. And somewhere in that blur, you stopped sleeping without help. You stopped eating like a human. You stopped asking to be heard. You learned to nod, to take the pills, to do the next show. You told jokes on stage while your heart was failing. You kissed strangers while your real relationships collapsed. You walked through Graceland surrounded by people who worked for you but didn't see you. Your face on every tabloid, your name on every billboard, and still, no one really knew what your voice sounded like when it wasn't singing. You miss your mama. You miss Memphis before the noise. You miss being poor because at least back then you knew who you were. Now you wake up bloated, medicated, trapped in a body that used to be adored, in a house that looks like a castle but feels like a prison. You can't remember the last time someone touched you without expecting something. You were born with nothing but a twin who never got to breathe and a mother who gave you everything she had, which was barely enough. Tupelo, Mississippi. Dirt under your nails. Heat in your lungs and church in your ears. You sat in pews watching the Holy Ghost move through poor black voices and something in you cracked open, like a window catching wind. The rhythm stayed in your chest even after the sermon ended. Your mama scrubbed floors to keep the lights on. Your daddy disappeared when things got hard. And you? You sang. Not for attention, not for fame, but because singing made the world hurt less. The voice was always there, pure, software, then strong. You sang gospel like you meant it, blues like you lived it. And when you got a guitar, it wasn't a toy. It was a weapon, a prayer, a secret doorway. You didn't dream of being rich. You dreamed of getting out, of taking care of your mama, of proving that just because you were poor didn't mean you were nothing. Then came Sun Records, a nervous kid with slicked hair and a twitch in his leg. You didn't sound like anyone, you didn't look like anyone, and that's all it took. The world tilted. Girls screamed, radio stations spun your name like it was prophecy. You weren't just a new sound, you were a rupture. A white boy singing with black soul, moving like something forbidden, opening a door the South wanted nailed shut. They called you dangerous. They were right. Because you made people feel something they didn't have a word for. Desire. Freedom. Rebellion. And it sold like nothing else. By 21, you were on every screen. Your hips were edited off TV. Preachers cursed you from pulpits while their daughters pasted your face to their bedroom walls. You didn't even know how to walk through a room anymore without someone screaming. The boys wanted to be you. The girls wanted to be near you. The system wanted to own you. And that's exactly what happened. Colonel Parker. Contracts. RCA. Movies. Army. Graceland. You thought success would make you free. It made you valuable, and valuable things are always controlled. They took the wildness and polished it, took your voice and softened it, took your soul and shaped it into a product. You filmed movie after movie you hated, sang songs you didn't believe in, smiled through premieres and press junkets and photo ops while your body begged for rest. And every time you asked for something real, they handed you something synthetic, another script, another single, another show. You kept going. You told yourself it was for your mama, for your fans, for your legacy. But what you really wanted, what you never got, was permission to stop, to breathe, to be Elvis the man, not the myth. But by the time you realized it was too late. The machine had been fed, and you were inside it. You thought he was saving you. He spoke with confidence, carried himself like a man who never blinked, wore that damn hat like it was part of his skull. Colonel Tom Parker. Not a real colonel, not even a real name. But he knew how to make things happen. And when you were young and scared and dazzled by flashbulbs, you listened. He told you he'd make you a star. He said you'd never have to worry again. And he kept that promise in the worst possible way. Because he didn't make you a man. He made you a product. A deal. A brand. Something with margins and price tags and shelf life. You didn't read the contracts. Who did? You just wanted to sing. You just wanted your mama to be proud. But while you were smiling into cameras and shaking hands with presidents, he was counting your worth in quarters and locking you into deals you didn't even understand. You didn't tour internationally, not because you didn't want to, but because he couldn't leave the country. You were the most famous man on earth and couldn't step off American soil. He booked you in Vegas not because you loved it, but because it was easy to control, predictable, profitable. He sold your name to casinos like it was a soda brand. You stood on stage in sequins while he stuffed his pockets. He told you the pills would help, told you to trust the doctors, told you everything was under control, and you believed him because you needed to. Because the idea that your whole life had been a trick was too much to swallow. You defended him long after you should have run, because loyalty was stitched into you by your mama. Because fear sounded a lot like love when it came in the form of a man who made you feel seen. And by the time you realized the cage he built around you was airtight, you were too tired to break out. He told you when to sleep, when to sing, when to speak, what to sign. He said, "Don't worry about the details." And you didn't. Until the details became chains. And still, the world called you the king. A king who couldn't leave his own country, couldn't fire his own manager, couldn't go to sleep without pills, couldn't take a breath without permission. People saw the mansion, the cars, the stage lights, the screaming fans, and thought, that must be freedom. But you knew the truth. You weren't free. You were owned, dressed in a jumpsuit you didn't choose, singing songs you didn't write, smiling a smile that wasn't yours anymore. You built Graceland to feel safe. But even there, the contracts followed. The colonel's voice still echoed. And you sat in a golden cage, watching the world adore your reflection, while no one noticed you were vanishing inside it. Vegas wasn't a stage. It was a cycle. A fixed loop of sweat, rhinestones, and routine that stripped time of meaning. The curtains rose and fell, but nothing ever changed. The lights stayed the same. The band played the same intro. The crowd screamed the same scream. The city pumped noise through its neon veins, but inside, it was all dead repetition. It didn't matter how you felt, bloated, exhausted, trembling from whatever cocktail the doctor had handed you 2 hours before, because the show had to go on. You walked out in white, shining under hot lights that turned your skin into a furnace, sequins stuck to sweat. Microphones shook slightly in your hand. You told jokes between songs to mask the fatigue, laughed with a tight jaw, blew kisses with numb lips. They thought it was charm. It was survival. The audience didn't see the pain. Or maybe they did and called it showmanship. Maybe they believed the king was immortal, immune to collapse. But every night chipped away something you couldn't get back. The shows weren't for joy anymore. They were obligation, contract, rhythm without heart. Afterward, you'd return to the suite, silence pressing against the walls like a second skin. Sometimes you ate, sometimes you didn't. Sometimes you stared at the TV with the volume down low, just to pretend someone else was in the room. On lucky nights, someone stayed. On most nights, the silence stayed longer. The pills became as routine as the encores. Uppers, downers, mood balancers, pain dullers, each with a purpose, none with a promise. They kept your body moving long after your soul had slumped in the corner. Vegas was supposed to be your comeback, but comebacks require a departure, and you'd never really left. You were always on, always available, always half awake and half smiling. People came to see the legend. You gave them the remains. The voice still worked most nights. The hip still moved, just barely, but the light in your eyes flickered more than it shined. And no one backstage ever asked how you were. They asked what time you'd be ready, what you wanted for dinner, what color suit you'd wear tomorrow. The machine didn't care if you were dying, as long as the image lived. So you gave them what they paid for, night after night, until the floor of that stage might as well have been your grave. Graceland was never quiet, even when it was silent. The walls hummed with memory, pulsed with the echo of cameras, laughter, footsteps that didn't belong to family but staff, strangers, intruders in tailored uniforms. From the outside, it looked like peace. Gates, columns, a king's house. But inside, the air was too still, like time had been put in a jar and sealed shut. Furniture sat like scenery. Rooms were preserved like wax museums, decor frozen, untouched, ornate but unlived. You moved through it like a visitor in your own life. The jungle room, green and humid, full of absurdity. The TV room, full of noise without meaning. The kitchen, where no one cooked anymore. It was supposed to be home. Instead, it became your final performance space. Paparazzi hovered at the gate, tourists camped on the lawn, and you hid upstairs, in the only space that was still off limits to the public. Your sanctuary, your cell. There were nights you walked the halls barefoot, unable to sleep, hearing your own footsteps like a stranger's. The house creaked, not from age but from emptiness. You had filled it with things, hoping they'd substitute for connection. Statues, mirrors, chandeliers, rugs, paintings, each purchased another attempt to cover the hollowness you didn't know how to name. You built it for your mama, but she wasn't here. And nothing filled that space. Not the records, not the fans, not the lights. You tried to bring people in. Friends, women, cousins, bodyguards. They stayed, they partied, they laughed. But none of them stayed for long after the music stopped. Most of them needed something. Most of them disappeared when you couldn't give it. Graceland held the idea of family, but not the weight of it. You were surrounded, but never held. Watched, but never truly seen. The upstairs bedroom became your cave, curtains drawn, lights dim. TVs on in every room as if the noise could imitate presence. Some nights you stood by the window looking down at the fans outside, waving, singing, crying. You loved them, but you couldn't reach them. Not anymore. You wanted them to know you were grateful, that they mattered, that they had saved you and also slowly, accidentally helped bury you. But those were thoughts you never said aloud. Instead, you pressed your hand to the glass and hoped that somehow, someone down there could feel it. Graceland was supposed to be the reward. Instead, it was the monument that started going up before you were even gone. The body always goes first. Before the mind caves in, before the soul quits, the body sends its warnings. Yours started quietly. A twitch, a tremor, a night of shallow sleep. Then came the bloating, the pain in the joints, the pills to move, the pills to stop moving, the hours spent trying to get your voice back into your throat before a show. No one teaches you how to care for a body that's not really yours anymore. Your body belonged to the world. It had been rented out to fame. It had been filmed, photographed, multiplied, criticized, reshaped, celebrated, and dissected. It stopped feeling like skin and started feeling like costume. You wore it because you had to, and you watched it change. The boy with sharp cheekbones and rebel posture became a man padded with chemicals, with time, with exhaustion that no rest could touch. You tried diets, doctors, more pills, always more pills. You took them to eat. You took them not to eat, you took them to stand up. You took them to lie down. You no longer knew what normal felt like. Your body became a stranger, one you carried like a burden, not a home. But the show didn't care. The suits still had to be zipped. The spotlight still had to hit you just right. No one backstage asked why your hands shook. They powdered your face. They gave you water. They told you 5 minutes. You nodded and tried not to think about the stairs, about your knees, about the burning behind your eyes. The pain moved in permanently. It crawled into your spine, your gut, your sleep. You sang anyway. You danced anyway. You collapsed after the curtain fell, and they called it dedication. You lived in a body that could no longer carry the legend built on it, and everyone around you pretended not to see the difference. And so you learned to pretend too. You hid behind the glasses, behind the glitter, behind the myth. The world only wanted one version of you. The one that didn't sweat, didn't stumble, didn't forget lyrics, didn't bleed. The perfect Elvis. So when the real Elvis started falling apart, no one knew what to do. Not even you. You laughed it off. You kept going. Until the machine broke the frame it depended on. And even then, it wanted one more show. They say love saves people. They say it heals, lifts, transforms. But no one talks about what happens when love can't reach deep enough. When it arrives too late or in the wrong shape. You had love. Plenty of it, at least on paper. Women who adored you. Crowds who worshipped you. A daughter who looked at you like the sun. But none of it ever filled the gap. Because real love needs access to the real you. And by the time anyone got close, you weren't sure who that even was anymore. You loved Priscilla. In the beginning, it felt pure, like she saw the boy behind the king. But the world doesn't leave room for quiet love. Fame swallows intimacy. There are no ordinary days, no privacy, no space to grow beside each other. Only travel, pressure, absence, headlines. She loved you, but she had to survive too. And survival meant stepping back before the weight crushed her too. The divorce wasn't rage, it was inevitability. Even Lisa Marie, your little girl, the one person who might have anchored you back to something real, couldn't change the rhythm of the descent. You loved her fiercely, but even then, your love came wrapped in chaos, in distance, in fog. You wanted to be better. You told yourself you would. But the road didn't stop. The walls kept closing. And love needs air. Your fans wrote you letters about how much you meant to them. They named their children after you. They waited outside venues for hours. That love was real, but one-directional. They didn't know what haunted you at night. They didn't hear your breath catch between verses. They couldn't feel the panic settle in your chest as you stood behind the curtain, wondering if tonight would be the night something in you snapped. They loved the idea, and the idea thrived while the man deteriorated. Every relationship became distorted. You didn't know who to trust, who needed something, who would leave. Love, real love, got tangled in suspicion and routine. The bodyguard said yes. The women stayed until the lights dimmed. You handed out gifts like currency, Cadillacs, rings, watches, hoping generosity would buy what nothing else could. Loyalty, affection, presence. But things don't hold people. And eventually, neither did you. You were surrounded by people, but alone in the most terrifying way. Because you knew, deep down, that none of it would be enough to stop what was coming. That love, in the end, was not armor. Not for you. Fame doesn't kill you quickly. It's not a bullet or a fire. It's slower, quieter, more polite. It feeds you sugar and praise until your spine bends under the weight of being adored. It claps while you decay. It smiles as it swallows you. For you, it started like a gift. A golden door swinging open. Your voice echoed into a world that wasn't ready, and they crowned you for it. At first it felt like validation. The kid who had nothing now had everything. But fame doesn't give. It trades. For every scream it takes a piece of your silence. For every magazine cover, a piece of your skin. For every stadium, a piece of your rest. It took your name and turned it into property. You stopped being a person. You were Elvis, not a man, not a body with limits, a brand, an object of nostalgia, a symbol to be used and reused. And the applause, God, the applause, was addictive. It drowned out the ache. It masked the confusion. It told you you were still alive, even when you felt like a hollow thing walking. But the high never lasted. Every cheer faded into another silence. And the silence grew heavier with time. The stage became a kind of coffin. You walked into it night after night, fully aware that the roar of the crowd was louder than your own heartbeat. They loved you, but they didn't see you. Or maybe they saw too much and chose to look away. Fame gave you power, but not control. It gave you wealth, but not peace. It gave you everything, except an exit. Because there is no off switch for being legendary. You couldn't walk down the street, couldn't go to a diner, couldn't take your daughter to a movie, couldn't sit in a church pew without flashbulbs bursting in your face, and so the world outside shrank, and the world inside dimmed. You stayed behind the gates, behind the curtains, behind the sunglasses, smiling when asked, performing when summoned, crumbling in private, and still they clapped. Still they bought the tickets. Still they called you the king, even as the man behind the title slipped further away. That's the thing they never tell you. When you become famous enough, people stop noticing when you're dying. Because to them, you've already become immortal. The bathroom wasn't sacred, but it was private. One of the last places you could close a door and be alone without a flashbulb waiting on the other side. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't Graceland's proudest room. But toward the end, it became your hiding place. You'd sit there, sometimes for hours, in silence. The tile cold beneath your feet. Your body no longer your own. The mirror in front of you stopped reflecting who you once were. It showed the swelling, the wear, the cracks. You studied yourself like a stranger. Tried to find traces of the boy from Tupelo in the lines around your mouth, in the puff beneath your eyes, in the slight sag of your neck. But the boy was gone. Fame had melted him down and poured him into a mold you could never escape. You were bloated, yes, but worse than that, you were disconnected. You could feel your body slipping from your control. Your heart fluttered. Your hands trembled. The pain in your gut was constant. You took more pills. Not because you wanted to get high, you just didn't want to feel the weight of being you anymore. And sitting on that cold floor, you wondered if anyone would miss the real you. Not the jumpsuit, not the voice, the man, the confused, aching, quiet man. You reached for a book you couldn't finish. You thought of your daughter, of what you wanted to say to her. You'd tried to change, but the world doesn't wait for broken men to heal. And your body, that temple of 1,000 stages, had decided it had carried enough. The curtain would fall soon, not on a stage, but here, on a tile floor behind a locked door, in the quietest room in the house. And then it was over. They say you died of a heart attack? Maybe. But it started long before your chest gave out. It started when they took your voice and repackaged it. When they took your image and sold it in pieces. When they took your peace, your privacy, your power. They took the simplicity of your love for music and turned it into an empire you couldn't control. They took your fear and turned it into a spectacle. They took your kindness and drained it until you had nothing left to give. You became a blueprint, a franchise, a fantasy. But you weren't built for business, you were built for feeling. And no machine can survive that much feeling without consequence. They say you had everything: money, women, fame, power. But they never mention what you didn't have: rest, stillness, truth. Your days were dictated. Your nights were medicated. Your relationships were conditional. Your future was predetermined. Every attempt you made to reclaim yourself was folded back into the myth. They took your silences and called them moodiness. Your anxiety became gossip. Your loneliness was romanticized. Even your death became marketing. Even the tragedy got merchandised. And still, no one asked what it cost, what it really cost to carry that crown on a breaking neck. But some things they couldn't take? Not really. They couldn't take the sound of that first note in Can't Help Falling in Love, the way it lingers in a quiet room like a prayer. They couldn't take the ripple in a woman's chest when she saw you walk on stage. They couldn't take the magic of that first time America saw you move. Not just dance, but move, with something spiritual in your hips. They couldn't take the raw vulnerability in Love Me Tender, the way you held pain in a note longer than most people could hold a breath. They couldn't take the truth buried in your laughter when it wasn't for cameras, the way you loved your mama like she was oxygen, the way you gave even when you were empty, the way you carried the sound of gospel in your bones even in the filth of Vegas, even in the haze of pills. They couldn't take the man who sang because he needed to, not because he was paid to. That man still existed, beneath the marble, the myth, the marketing, quiet, wounded, waiting to be seen. And maybe that's what remains. After the lights, after the business, after the jokes, after the movie scripts and impersonators and endless Elvis weeks, maybe what's left is something small but human. A boy who wanted to matter. A man who gave too much. A voice that outlived the throat that held it. A warning carved in gold records. A message drowned in applause. Maybe it's this: that being loved by the whole world means nothing if you can't find yourself inside that love. That fame without truth is a slow death. That glory without rest is a curse. That even kings bleed. That behind every icon is a man who walks into a bathroom one night and doesn't walk back out. And no one hears the thud of the final fall over the sound of their own cheering. They didn't bury you, they packaged you, wrapped you in silk, sealed you in gold, and placed you in a museum that used to be your home. They came in droves, crying, praying, snapping photos, wearing your face on their chests like a medal. The world didn't grieve you, they consumed you again. Even in death, you were too valuable to rest. Your grave became a destination. Your name, a franchise. Your image, an industry. Elvis lives, they said. Not because you did, but because the machine needed you to. They played your songs louder, pressed more vinyl, released more compilations, tribute concerts, impersonator contests, holograms. You were dead, but profitable. And maybe that was the plan all along. You had become too unpredictable, too fragile, too human, dead. You were easier to control, easier to love. There were no more pills, no more late shows, no more missed rehearsals. Just product. You were frozen in time, suspended in glitter and myth. The boy from Tupelo disappeared, and the statue remained. The soft voice silenced, but the soundtrack kept playing. They didn't let you fade. They marketed your absence. They called it legacy. But it felt more like desecration. And then they started laughing. Not at first. At first, there was mourning, tributes, flowers, candlelight. But the jokes came quickly. The jumpsuits, the peanut butter sandwiches, the bathroom. Always the bathroom. The punchlines wrote themselves. The king died on the toilet. The king couldn't control himself. The king became a cartoon, bloated and bedazzled. They didn't talk about your insomnia, your grief, your shattered nervous system. They didn't mention the endless cycle of prescriptions, the manipulation, the exploitation. They didn't talk about the cost of being watched your whole life, the toll it takes to never truly be alone except when you're suffering. They boiled you down to sideburns and sequins, made comedy sketches, turned you into a Halloween costume. They mocked the decline without ever acknowledging who pushed you off the edge. You became safe to ridicule once you stopped breathing. It's easy to laugh at a man who can't answer back. Easy to call it excess when no one mentions pain. Easy to make a myth shallow when the real story is too heavy to carry. They stripped the tragedy for entertainment. Turned your fall into folklore. People who never knew you, never saw what you carried, now own your image. Your name is printed on mugs and slot machines. Not even your silence belongs to you anymore. And what hurts the most, what lingers in the bones, is that they never gave you a chance to grow old. You weren't allowed to gray gently, to sit on a porch in peace, to be forgotten in a natural, quiet way. No one ever imagined you with a soft belly and gray stubble, walking slow, humming to yourself in the kitchen. You were denied the right to evolve, to disappoint, to change. You were frozen at 42, embalmed in youth and tragedy. Your death gave them what they needed, a permanent Elvis, untouchable, unchangeable. But you wanted to age, you wanted to rest, to raise your daughter, to maybe finally go overseas, walk through Rome or Paris like a normal man. You wanted to breathe without it being measured, maybe write songs again, not for charts, but for healing. Maybe go back to the gospel, find God without cameras, grow fat on your own terms, laugh without shame, cry without headlines. But the world doesn't let legends fade. It keeps them shining until the light blinds them, and then calls it brilliance. You weren't supposed to die when you did, but the version of you they loved couldn't survive much longer anyway. The real you had already been exiled long before your heart stopped. They called you the king, but treated you like a god. Not a man, not someone with bruises and doubts. You became worshipped, not loved. And worship is colder than affection. It doesn't ask how you are. It doesn't forgive weakness. It demands performance, perfection, stillness. The world built shrines out of your records, altars out of your stage photos. Fans whispered your name like scripture. They cried at your gate as if touching it brought them closer to the divine. But behind every prayer was a transaction. They wanted a miracle, a memory, a piece of you to carry home. You gave it, again and again, until there was nothing left but an echo. That's what they never tell you. When you become a religion, no one lets you evolve. They want the version of you they fell in love with, over and over again. And when you change, when you age, when you hurt, they turn away. Or worse, they get angry. Because the God they created doesn't suffer. The God doesn't bloat. The God doesn't forget lyrics or cancel shows or lock himself in a room for 3 days straight. Because he can't face the spotlight. And so, when your humanity leaked through the cracks, they didn't meet it with compassion. They met it with confusion, disgust, disbelief. Because you weren't supposed to need help. You were Elvis. You were immortal. You weren't supposed to need saving. You were the savior, the symbol, the voice, the dream. But the cost of becoming a religion is that no one lets you fall. And when you do, they don't know how to catch you. So they step back. And they pray louder. Not for you, but for what you used to be. They circled you for decades. Smiling, serving, managing, enabling, medicating, photographing. They called themselves friends, family, fans. But many of them fed on you. Some did it with invoices, some with affection that came only when you were generous, some with cameras, some with silence. They watched you deteriorate and chose not to speak. They watched your hands tremble and called it just tired. They handed you pills because it was easier than having a conversation. Easier than saying, "You're not okay." Easier than risking the money, the show, the image. You gave them paychecks, access, proximity to greatness. And in return, they kept the machine running, no matter how loudly it groaned. You were their sun, their livelihood, their status. So when your eyes dimmed, they told themselves it was just the lighting. And when you cried, they left the room. Not everyone, no. Some cared, some tried. But the ones who had real power, the ones who could have stopped the spiral, chose instead to tighten the screws. Because they needed you working, singing, nodding, showing up, even when you were collapsing inside. They told themselves you were strong enough. And when you weren't, they told themselves it wasn't their fault. But the truth is simple. The people around you let you die slowly, because your suffering was profitable, and they made peace with that. In the end, there was no grand farewell, no orchestral crescendo, no whispered goodbye into a warm shoulder, just a locked bathroom, a failing heart, and a silence that had been growing for years. You didn't die with a mic in your hand. You didn't die in front of a crowd. You died alone, in a room you didn't decorate, with your head slumped forward and your soul already halfway gone. The news broke and the world wept. Crowds formed, reporters gathered, but you were already still, already free. The voice that had moved nations had gone quiet, and maybe, for the first time, it was allowed to be quiet. No demands, no lights, no encores, just silence. Not punishment, not shame, just rest. Something you hadn't tasted in decades. And in that final moment, maybe you weren't Elvis. Maybe you weren't the king. Maybe you were just a tired man, finally released from the weight of being a symbol no one ever let put down the crown. Legacy isn't truth. It's a story told by those who survived you, and most of them remember you wrong. Not out of cruelty, but convenience. It's easier to remember the image, the pose, the soundbite, the headline. It's harder to remember a man, a body that ached, a mind that frayed, a soul that stretched between light and collapse. They remember the lip curl, the gold belt, the Vegas swagger. They forget the letters you wrote and never sent, the nights you sat awake reading spiritual books, trying to make sense of the pain fame never explained. They remember the rhinestones but not the ribs that hurt under them. They remember the laugh but not the silence that followed when the room emptied. You were buried in exaggeration. They made you myth before they made you human. They said you were larger than life, but that was never the point. You weren't trying to be big. You were trying to be felt. They talk about you like you were an era, a style, a phenomenon, but you were also just a man who liked to sing, who missed his mama, who wanted to be held without expectation. They remembered your fall louder than your rise. The decline sold better than the dream. They framed your end as spectacle, not sorrow. The bathroom, the drugs, the weight. It made for better headlines than the truth. That you were tired. That you were used up. That you were left behind by a system that took everything and gave back silence. And still, even in that, you forgave them. Because deep down, you wanted to be loved, even by those who didn't deserve your grace. But shadows don't vanish when the body dies. They stretch. They follow. Yours followed millions. Imitators filled bars and arenas, all trying to sound like you, move like you, be you. But none of them carried your grief. None of them knew the weight. They wore the clothes, but not the cost. Your shadow walked through time, lingering in hotel lobbies, back rooms, secondhand record stores, car stereos. You haunted jukeboxes and memories. You haunted people who never met you. You became a backdrop to breakups, to funerals, to quiet drives. Your voice stitched itself into the emotional DNA of generations. Even when people joked about you, they didn't forget you. You were there in their nostalgia, in their longing, in their wish that something that pure could still exist in the world. And maybe your shadow wasn't heavy. Maybe it wasn't a curse. Maybe it was a soft reminder that even beauty dies under pressure, that even light has a cost. The people who truly listened, who looked past the glitter, saw it, saw the ache behind the smirk, saw the devotion inside the hips, saw the preacher's son still trying to reach heaven through a song, and they carried that. Quietly. Carefully. Not the legend, but the loss, that was your shadow too. If you could speak now, what would you say? Maybe not much. Maybe just something simple. You never needed long speeches. Maybe you'd look someone in the eye and say, "Don't chase the noise. It'll eat you alive." Or maybe, "Hold on to the people who love you for who you are when the crowd goes home." Maybe you'd whisper to your daughter that you tried, that you really tried, that you sang through the pain and smiled through the fear and gave until there was nothing left. Maybe you'd ask the world to forgive your mistakes, but more importantly, to understand them. Not excuse. Just see. Maybe you'd finally say what no one let you say. That you were scared. That the spotlight burned. That the applause became a cage. That being everything to everyone left you empty to yourself. You'd say you weren't ungrateful, just overwhelmed. That you never wanted to be a god. Just a man with a voice and a dream and a mother to protect. And maybe you'd end it there. Not with a grand finale, not with an anthem, just a breath, a pause, a return to stillness, not because the story's over, but because for once, you don't have to carry it. Being first is never clean. It's never fair. The first one through the door always bleeds. You weren't just a singer, you were the earthquake, the bridge between worlds that weren't supposed to touch. A white boy carrying the sound of Black America in your voice, your movement, your bones. The world didn't know what to do with you. They loved you and hated you. They called you revolutionary, then thief, hero, then parasite. You walked into fire just by existing. You didn't ask to start a cultural war, but your hips moved and suddenly the lines cracked. People saw you as the messenger, but you knew the truth. You were the echo of something older, deeper, more sacred. You never claimed to invent it. You always pointed back. To gospel, to blues, to rhythm that came out of church pews and cotton fields and juke joints. You bowed to them, but the spotlight erased your humility. The machine painted you as the origin instead of the student, and you were trapped in it. The face of something too complex to control, too powerful to escape. Being first means being misunderstood, means being used, means being burned alive while people cheer and take pictures. You paid a price for walking where no one had walked before. And though they built statues in your honor, they never gave you peace. They turned you into a symbol of rebellion, of whiteness, of America itself. And symbols don't get to rest. But through it all, gospel never left you. It lived in your throat, even when the lyrics changed. It followed you into Vegas, into studios, into quiet rooms when your hands wouldn't stop shaking. You turned back to it like a child returns to a lullaby. In gospel, you weren't the king. You weren't a sex icon. You were a believer, a son, a boy who missed his mama and believed heaven had to be real because otherwise none of this made sense. You didn't perform gospel. You needed it. It was your anchor, your medicine. You recorded those songs not to sell, but to survive. When everything else fell apart, marriage, body, mind, the hymns stayed. You would sit at the piano and close your eyes and sing like no one was listening. And in those moments, something holy happened. Not performance, not entertainment, just surrender. You weren't looking for applause. You were looking for God, or at least for stillness, for the ache to lift, and maybe for a minute it did. Maybe that's why you kept coming back to those harmonies, those sacred phrases. Because they reminded you of who you were before the world named you. Because they carried your truth when you were too tired to speak it. What they'll never understand is how much you gave up to be what they needed. How lonely it is to be loved by everyone except the people you need most. How fame doesn't erase fear. It multiplies it. They'll never understand the silence that followed every standing ovation. The way your heart raced in the dressing room after every show. Not from adrenaline, but from panic. They'll never understand what it does to a person to be touched by thousands, but never held. To be adored by millions, but rarely listened to. To have people cry when they see you, but never ask how you are. You carried all of that and still sang, still smiled, still gave. That's what they won't get. They'll talk about the music, the money, the jumpsuits, the drugs. They'll write documentaries and tributes and think they know the story, but they don't know the sound of your breath at 3 a.m. They don't know what it felt like to wake up and not recognize your reflection. They don't know the prayers you whispered that never made it into a song. What they'll never understand is that behind every myth is a man. And that man was tired. That man was kind. That man was trying, even at the end, and that's the part that deserves to be remembered most. They buried you in gold and noise, a casket like a throne, flowers thick as velvet, crowds pressing against fences, desperate to catch a final glimpse. But it was never quiet. The cameras flashed like it was a red carpet. Reporters leaned into grieving faces. Helicopters buzzed overhead like vultures. No one let the silence fall, not even for a moment. The world mourned you in volume, as if loudness could replace grief, as if spectacle could substitute intimacy. They lined up for hours to look at you, not because they knew you, but because they needed to say they were there. The funeral wasn't about letting go. It was about preserving the legend. The gold lid, the white suit, the soundtrack already playing. It was a stage, just like all the others. And you were still performing, still on display, still trapped in the costume. What no one saw was the cold under all that shine, the stillness you finally reached, the kind you never got in life. There should have been silence, a whisper. One gospel song sung softly in a room with no cameras. Instead, there were headlines, flashbulbs, memorabilia booths just down the street. Even your death became an event. Even your rest got sold. And then came the flood. Everyone had something to say. People you hadn't seen in years sat in interviews and told stories with tears cued perfectly. Former managers, girlfriends, cousins, musicians, neighbors. Suddenly all of them were experts on your soul. They told the world who you were, what you wanted, what broke you. Your name passed through mouths that had barely spoken to you in life. They shaped your story to fit their needs. Some painted you as a tragic genius. Some called you an addict who had it coming. Others turned you into a moral lesson, a cautionary tale about fame and failure. Everyone used your name to build something. A book, a documentary, a career. They debated your heart like it was public property. No one asked who you trusted. No one checked your journals. No one sat in the rooms where you wept and stayed quiet. They owned your face, your sound, your myth, but never your truth. And that's what hurt most. Your silence became opportunity. A dead man can't correct the record, so they wrote it for you. Graceland became a museum before the body was cold. Tour routes were drawn, merch stocked, velvet ropes installed. They walked strangers through your bedroom like it was a shrine, but they didn't let them into the upstairs where the real ache lived. The room where you shut the door and asked to be left alone, the TV blaring, the books left half read, the body giving out in private. They preserved the fantasy, not the man. They sold pieces of your life in plastic wrapping. Your favorite chair, your kitchen, your ashtray, they made it look holy. But it was desecration, a frozen portrait of someone who begged to disappear. You didn't want more eyes, you wanted less. You weren't asking to be remembered, you were asking to rest. But rest doesn't sell, so they kept the lights on, kept the gates open, kept your ghost moving mile after mile through tours and anniversaries and holograms. But a man isn't a destination, he's a story that no one's finished reading. And the more they walked through your halls, the less they listened to what your silence was trying to say. The stage didn't just demand your voice, it demanded your soul. Every time you stepped into that spotlight, something was taken. It wasn't immediate, it didn't feel violent, it felt like worship, applause, attention. But little by little, the stage stripped you of pieces you never got back. It took your privacy first, no more walking into diners, no more going to the movies, no more sitting in church without whispers. Then it took your rest, sleepless nights, endless rehearsals, constant travel, your body always moving even when your mind begged to stop. Then it took your body, worn down by sequins and sweat and the pressure to look like someone you no longer were. But the worst was when it took your ability to feel anything outside of it. The crowd became your oxygen. Without them, you felt like you didn't exist. You forgot how to sit still. Forgot how to be in a room without filling it with performance. The silence became unbearable. You became addicted to the sound of approval, not out of arrogance, but out of survival. The stage gave you the only language the world ever wanted from you. So, you kept returning, even when your knees hurt, even when your heart fluttered with exhaustion, even when the jumpsuit no longer zipped. You went back. Because at least there, under the lights, for a moment, you still felt real. Even if it cost you everything. But being a memory is heavier than being a man. You became everyone's first crush, their parents' soundtrack, their grandmother's favorite smile. You lived in wedding songs and funeral playlists. In commercials and movies, you became something people inherited, passed down like furniture, recalled in fragments. My mother loved Elvis. My father cried when he died. My grandfather used to play his records every Sunday. And there you were, stitched into their nostalgia. But no one ever asked if you wanted to be remembered that way. They remembered the image, not the interior. They remembered the hips, not the heart. The voice, not the silence behind it. You became immortal in all the ways that trap a person. Because when a memory becomes a product, it stops evolving. You couldn't outgrow the version of you they fell in love with. You weren't allowed to grow bitter, or broken, or boring. You had to stay gold. Stay perfect. Stay trapped in the year they decided you meant the most to them. But people forget that memories are curated. The pain gets cropped. The doubt erased. The loneliness softened until it's romantic. But you weren't a poem. You were a person. And no matter how beautifully they spoke your name, it didn't change the fact that you had once stared into a mirror and wished you could be someone else just for a day. If there's a heaven, maybe it doesn't look like gold gates and choirs. Maybe it looks like silence. Maybe it's a room with no stage, no cameras, no expectations. Just a window, a breeze, and a chair that doesn't ask you to perform. Maybe your mama is there. And you sit beside her. Not as Elvis, but just as her son. Maybe she sings low and you hum along, and no one interrupts with applause. No one says, "Do that again." Maybe heaven is where the lights finally go off. Where no one knocks on your door. Where no one needs anything from you. Where your voice isn't a symbol, it's just your voice. Maybe you walk slowly. No handlers, no itinerary, no screaming, just stillness. And maybe God doesn't greet you with thunder, but with a whisper. Maybe he says, "You did what you could. Now rest." And maybe for the first time since you were a boy, you believe it. Not because it's quiet, but because you finally are. Peace wasn't supposed to be a luxury. It was supposed to be the natural ending of effort, of sacrifice, of giving everything. But somehow, the more you gave, the farther peace drifted from you. It was always just beyond reach, behind a locked door, behind a contract, behind another crowd. Even when you were home, you weren't still. Even when you were surrounded, you were alone. The phones rang, the voices called, the lights never dimmed. You chased quiet in empty halls and late-night drives, in pills that promised sleep but never gave you rest. You built Graceland as a shield, but it echoed louder than the world outside. Peace was never given to you. You had to steal it, in 5-minute windows, in the backseat of limos, in the few seconds before applause erupted. You tried to find it in love, but fame turned love into performance. You tried to find it in faith, but even prayer felt staged when people were watching. You tried to find it in family, but even your daughter had to share you with the planet. Peace wasn't a mansion. It wasn't silence. It was being seen without being consumed. And the world never gave you that. So maybe, in the end, death wasn't the loss. Maybe it was the return. The only door left that couldn't be pushed open by someone else. The only place where you didn't have to sing to be allowed to breathe. No one should be this famous. It sounds like a blessing. It sounds like a dream. But it is a cage made of gold so polished, it blinds you from the inside. The human mind isn't built to carry the weight of millions. The The nervous system isn't designed for endless exposure. You became an icon before you understood what it meant to be a man. And from that moment on, you were no longer allowed to learn slowly. Every mistake was public. Every heartbreak was headlined. Every silence was interpreted. Every shadow photographed. Fame took the small joys first. Walking alone, going to the store, laughing, without being quoted. Then it took the deeper things. Trust, privacy, control. You couldn't pick your clothes. Couldn't pick your set list. Couldn't pick your future. They say power comes with fame, but that's only half true. Fame replaces power. It owns you. And when you're that famous, the world doesn't ask if you're okay. It asks if you're available, ready, camera-friendly, smiling, singing. It never asks, are you surviving? Are you sane? Are you safe? And when you aren't, they say, he changed. He's difficult. He's not grateful. But you are always grateful, just not unbreakable. No one should be this famous, because no one should be watched this closely while falling apart. Let the lights go dark, not just on the stage, but in the memory. Let the myth sleep. Let the footage rest. Let the jumpsuits fade in closets. Let the impersonators stop rehearsing. Let the voice echo into quiet instead of remix. The story doesn't need more retellings, it needs closure. It needs gentleness. Enough with the tributes that don't understand the tragedy. Enough with the souvenirs shaped like suffering. Let the lights go dark. Let the image blur. Let the crowd forget the choreography. Let them remember the man instead. The tired hands, the honest laugh, the way you looked off stage in the seconds between performances, when the mask slipped and something fragile passed across your face. Let them remember the boy from Tupelo, barefoot and curious, not the king who was too tired to stand. Let the lights go dark, not out of sadness, but mercy. Because some legends deserve to rest. Some stories deserve an ending. And maybe, finally, you get to have yours. She stood outside the gate, no older than 16, holding a photograph worn at the edges, her eyes full of something heavier than fandom. She didn't scream. She didn't wave. She just looked up at the windows, waiting. Maybe she thought you'd appear. Maybe she thought the man in the posters still walked the halls, still opened curtains, still leaned over balconies like royalty in exile. Maybe she believed the rumors that you'd faked your death, that you'd show yourself to someone who really understood. But you didn't come. You couldn't. And yet, that girl stood there like faith incarnate. What she was waiting for wasn't just Elvis. It was something purer. A connection. A sign that the world could still be beautiful. You had become that for people. Hope in human form. A voice that wrapped around loneliness like a blanket. A reason to believe that magic once walked among us, rhinestoned and trembling. And she wasn't the only one. They came in thousands, not for your grave, but for your echo. Because even after death, you still gave them something to stand in front of and feel. And maybe that's the closest thing we ever get to. Immortality, not in marble or gold, but in one girl's silence, at one gate, on one humid evening. But what about the man you could have been? The one who aged in peace, who let his belly grow soft, who walked in the woods with his dogs and hummed hymns to the wind. The one who didn't have to explain himself to anyone. The man who sat with Lisa Marie under an open sky and told her the real stories, not the ones in books. The one who stopped dyeing his hair, who laughed with missing teeth, who cooked his own eggs, who lived off the map, who gave interviews once every 10 years and didn't care what anyone thought. That man never got to exist. He was sacrificed at the altar of permanence, because the world wanted the king forever young, forever thrilling, forever frozen at the height of spectacle. But maybe the man you could have been would have been happier than the one you were. Maybe he wouldn't have been as famous, but maybe he would have lived. Maybe you would have grown into someone slower, wiser, simpler. Not a monument, just a man. Maybe you would have played gospel in a small church somewhere, unannounced, unphotographed. Maybe you would have walked into a store and no one would have recognized you, and it would have felt like freedom. The tragedy isn't just that you died, it's that you were never allowed to become. So now it's time. Time to let go. To say goodbye not just to Elvis Presley, but to the king, to the illusion, to the burden, to the stage and the lights and the weight of having to be more than human. You were never meant to carry that crown. It was too big, too heavy. It made you shine, yes, but it also burned you from the inside. Say goodbye to the voice that had to keep singing even when the body begged to stop. Say goodbye to the smile that had to be worn like armor. Say goodbye to the 1,000 versions of you that the world demanded, each one louder than your own. Say goodbye to the stories others wrote for you, to the lies told in your name, to the silence you had to swallow. Say goodbye to the pressure, the distortion, the hunger for more that never left room for enough. And in that goodbye, maybe there's peace. Not the peace sold in headlines or sealed behind museum glass, but the kind that comes when the crowd stops clapping and the echo finally fades. Goodbye, Elvis. Not because you're forgotten, but because at last you're free. It's strange, the sound a person leaves behind. Not just in their voice, but in the absence of it. You don't notice it at first. The silence just slips in. No announcement, no drum roll. One day, the world keeps spinning, and you're no longer in it. But the space where you once stood stays open, like a seat at a table no one has the heart to clear. People keep playing your songs, but it's the quiet afterward that lingers longer. The way the room feels heavier when the music stops. The way the speakers hum after your voice fades out. That's your real legacy. Not the noise, but the vacuum. The ache left in your shape. People miss you in places they didn't expect. At gas stations. When suspicious minds place faintly overhead. In the back of a cab, when a driver hums along without thinking. They miss you when they're falling apart at 3 a.m., and your voice hits like a hand reaching through the dark, and they'll never be able to explain it. Not fully. Not clearly. Because your absence doesn't shout. It whispers. It rests quietly on their shoulders. It rides shotgun on lonely drives. It fills the space between memories and regret. The world moves on, but something in it limps slightly. Because when someone that big disappears, everything tilts a little. There is no sequel, not to you, not really. Others have tried, some sang better, danced harder, sold more. But no one replicated the ache, no one wore their longing so openly. No one bled charm and sadness in the same breath the way you did. You were lightning in a time before we knew how to bottle it. You couldn't be rebooted, recast, streamed in high definition. Because you weren't a franchise. You were a rupture, a break in the pattern, a sound that shouldn't have come from that body, from that town, from that moment, but did. And it changed everything. The world became different after you opened your mouth. People forget that. They reduce you to a haircut, a hip shake, a tragedy. But you weren't a gimmick. You were gospel in a jumpsuit. You were Southern sorrow turned into melody. You were what happened when desperation met talent and couldn't be contained. That's not something you can duplicate. You don't get a second Elvis, because that kind of miracle doesn't come twice. And maybe that's the most sacred thing about it. How brief it all was. How violent and beautiful and unrepeatable. Strip everything else away. Graceland, Vegas, the records, the girls, the myth. And what's left is this. A boy who sang. That's all you ever were. A kid with too much feeling, too much sound in his chest, standing in a room, hoping someone would hear. And they did. The whole world did. But they didn't just hear you, they took you, lifted you, decorated you, and eventually devoured you. But before all of that, it was just about the song. Your eyes closed. Your hand on the mic. That tremble in your voice that cracked open something holy. That's the part they forget when they dress like you. When they quote you. When they print your face on coffee mugs. That at the very core, you were just someone who needed to sing. Not to be famous, not to be rich, just to survive, to stay whole, to make sense of the ache. And maybe, just maybe, the only time you ever felt truly alive was when no one was looking. Just you and the music, alone in a room, chasing God in a melody only you could carry. There's a voice of yours no one ever heard. It never made it to vinyl, wasn't caught on camera, wasn't echoed through arena speakers. It was the voice you used at 4 a.m., sitting alone in a kitchen, humming something soft to keep from falling apart. The one you saved for empty rooms, for prayers, for grief. You used it when the pills wouldn't work, when the pain in your back was louder than any song. It was raw, trembling, half broken, but it was yours, not polished, not staged. Not lit, just a voice that carried the weight of everything you couldn't say out loud. No one ever recorded that voice. Not because it wasn't good enough, but because it was too real, too close to the truth. And the truth didn't sell. So you kept it for yourself. Or maybe you gave it to God, quietly, offering up what was left of you between the verses. That was your real voice. Not the one they remastered, looped, branded, but the one that cracked under the pressure of being needed by the entire world. And still, even in that crack, it never stopped singing. You never wanted the throne. You didn't ask to be crowned. You didn't build your life around being the king. That was their invention. Their need to name you. To place you above themselves, to make you something untouchable. But you weren't. You were always reachable, always vulnerable, always too soft for the role they gave you. Kings don't cry in bathrooms. Kings don't ask their staff to stay because they're scared of the silence. Kings don't give away Cadillacs like apologies, but you did. Because you weren't built for royalty. You were built for resonance, for empathy, for sound. The throne was never yours. It was placed beneath you and it trapped you there. A pedestal is a prison when you never asked to climb it. Every time you failed to meet their expectations, the throne grew sharper. Every pound you gained, every show you canceled, every quiet moment became betrayal. They loved you when you were myth, but punished you for being man. You spent your life apologizing for being tired, for aging, for bleeding. But a king doesn't need forgiveness. And that title, they gave it to you, without asking if you wanted to rule anything at all. So let him sleep now. Let the boy from Tupelo close his eyes without cameras peering through the cracks. Let the man in white hang up the suit for good. No more stages. No more scripts. No more need to smile when your chest is full of splinters. Let him rest where the noise can't reach. Where the gold is just dust and the name is just a name again. Where his daughter doesn't have to share him. Where his mother waits with open arms, not microphones. Let him sleep without being called back. No resurrections, no remakes, no more what-ifs. Let the story end here, not because it's finished, but because it finally found quiet. Because the real miracle isn't the fame. It's that somehow through it all he kept singing. And now, at last, he doesn't have to. You earned your silence every second of it. Not because you were perfect, but because you endured more noise than any one person should. They filled your life with sound, cheers, questions, flashbulbs, criticism, false praise, demands, static. You couldn't hear your own heartbeat over the volume. You couldn't hear your own thoughts. There were nights you sat in a chair, staring at nothing, trying to find yourself beneath all the voices that weren't yours. And even then, they kept coming. Agents, friends, strangers, lovers, each with their own idea of who you were supposed to be. But not one of them ever said, "You can stop now." Not one told you, "You've done enough. You can rest." So you had to keep going, even when your body begged you to slow down, even when your voice cracked, even when your soul slipped further away from your skin. Now, at last, there is quiet. Not just around you, but inside you. No interviews, no headlines, no expectations. The silence now is sacred. Not empty, not cold, but earned, like a deep exhale held too long. The kind of stillness you spend a lifetime chasing, but only find when it's too late to tell anyone how much it means. You wore so many faces, not out of deceit, but out of necessity. The world needed versions of you, and you gave them: the rebel, the lover, the king, the soldier, the prodigal son, the haunted genius, the entertainer who never broke. You wore them like costumes, tailored by expectation, and for a while, each one fit, until they didn't, until they became armor too heavy to lift. until you looked in the mirror and couldn't tell which mask you were putting on that day. Some days you were still the boy in the church pew, trembling with hope. Other days, you were a silhouette, a hollow shell wrapped in rhinestones, miming a legend who had left the room years ago. But you never stopped trying. You smiled through the fatigue, bowed through the heartbreak, signed autographs with hands that shook from withdrawals. The masks were never lies, they were shields. They kept the world at bay while you tried to keep some part of yourself intact. Now, finally, you don't need them. You don't have to be anything but still, but quiet, but gaunt, in the gentlest way. If there's grace in this life, then let it be found in how you left. Not dramatic, not on stage, not during a broadcast or a show. You left in a bathroom behind a closed door, without cameras, and though they made jokes, wrote headlines, turned it into spectacle, you knew what they didn't. That the end doesn't need applause. That maybe the softest exit is the truest one. You didn't script it. You didn't control it. But it was yours. After all the choreography, the lighting cues, the managed appearances, you slipped away unscripted. Finally. It wasn't poetic, but it was honest. And that might be the most beautiful thing you ever gave us. A reminder that even legends die small, human deaths. That even the king goes out like a man. Quietly, unexpectedly, heartbreakingly real. And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes it sacred. Somewhere in your chest, there was one more note. Maybe even a whole song. Something that had no chords yet. No stage, no audience. Just a feeling waiting to be turned into sound. Maybe it was softer than the rest. More prayer than performance. Not meant for a stadium. Meant for one person, maybe, or no one. A song not written for fame or radio, but for peace. You felt it in the moments before sleep, when the pills hadn't taken hold yet and the air was still. You felt it when Lisa Marie laughed. When you saw a picture of your mama you hadn't seen in years. A melody you didn't know how to play yet, because it wasn't born from fire, but from surrender. But the world never gave you time to find it. They demanded the hits, the encore, the legacy. You never got to finish that last note. You carried it inside, quiet, unfinished. And then, silence. And maybe that's okay. Maybe not all songs are meant to be heard. Maybe some are meant to be held like breath until they dissolve into the dark. What more could you have given? You gave your youth, your body, your voice until it cracked, your name until it didn't feel like yours. You gave America its soundtrack, its fantasy, its heartbreak. You gave strangers your time, your energy, your eyes, your exhaustion. You stood when you wanted to lie down. You smiled when you wanted to scream. You sang through illness, loss, confusion, betrayal. And still, people ask for more. A better version, a cleaner version, a comeback, a return. But the truth is, you had nothing left to prove. Not to them, not to yourself. The records were broken, the walls were shaken, the stages were filled. The crown was worn and weathered. You lived 3 lifetimes in the space of one broken one. And if anyone ever says you didn't do enough, they were never listening. You didn't owe the world another album, another tour, another miracle. What you gave was already too much. More than anyone should be asked to give. And still, you gave it with grace. Until you couldn't anymore. So now let him go. Not because he wasn't important, but because he was exhausted. Let go of the king, the legend, the statue, in the jumpsuit. Let go of the idea that he could have done more, or better, or differently. Let go of the myth that ate the man. Let go of the fantasy that greatness comes without a grave. Let him rest without revision. Let him rest without guilt. Without one more remix, one more documentary, one more impersonation. Let him be still. Let him be missed without being resurrected. Let him belong to himself, finally. Because maybe the greatest honor we can give to someone who gave us everything is to stop asking for more and just say, thank you. The dream was never supposed to hurt this much. It started pure. A boy and a guitar, a front porch, a wish. You never dreamed of palaces, of flashing lights, of Vegas. You dreamed of sound, of how a voice could change the air, how a note could open something locked inside a person. That was the real dream. But then, the world got involved. It dressed the dream in sequins, taught it choreography. gave it managers and handlers and contracts. It fed the dream steroids and asked it to dance faster, smile wider, sing louder. The dream got big, bigger than anyone life could hold. And that's when it started to break, not all at once, slowly. A crack in your smile, a hesitation in your step, a tremble in your voice that no one wanted to hear. But you kept pushing because the dream had momentum. And people don't want to know when a dream starts falling apart. They just want it to keep delivering. But dreams that ignore pain become nightmares. And by the end, you weren't chasing the dream anymore. You were running from it, trying to escape something you once prayed for. And that, maybe, is the saddest part of all. So, good night, Elvis. Not the brand, not the crown, the man, the son, the father, the frightened boy in the spotlight, doing his best. Good night to the voice that held a country together. Good night to the sweat that soaked your skin under stage lights, to the ache that medicine couldn't quiet. Good night to the long drives in the middle of the night when music was the only companion that didn't ask for anything back. Good night to the gospel that saved you for one more day, again and again. Good night to the body that betrayed you, and the soul that kept showing up anyway. Good night to the kindness you gave even when you were empty. To the jokes you told when your hands were shaking. To the grace you extended to people who only saw your reflection, never your depth. Good night to the unfinished songs, the unopened letters, the words you never found. Good night to the stages you outgrew, and the masks you never asked to wear. Good night to all the versions of you the world invented, and the one you carried in silence. Let that version rest now. Sleep well, and don't wake up this time. Not into another anniversary. Not into another impersonator's voice. Not into another tabloid headline. Don't be summoned again like a ghost who never earned his peace. No more holograms, no more tribute acts, no more museums pretending to know your heart. You've done enough. You've given more than enough. Now let this be the part where nothing more is required. No more proving. No more pleasing. No more performing. Let the sleep be deep, and the silence be thick, and the darkness be kind. Let the world keep spinning without demanding more of you. Let the music play without dragging you back on stage. If the afterlife is real, may it be small. May it be warm. May it not know your name unless you choose to share it. May you be anonymous there and safe. And may someone sing you to sleep now, softly, like you used to sing for all of us. Good night, Elvis. Sleep tight. And don't wake up this time. They'll keep playing you, long after the flowers on your grave turn to dust. They'll play you at wedding receptions and on road trips and in cafes where no one knows the lyrics, but they know the feeling. You'll live in speakers that have no memory of what you cost. You'll echo in earbuds pressed into heads rushing to forget their own lives. You'll come through in supermarkets and secondhand stores and airport lounges. They'll play you in movies when a scene needs something that sounds like longing, or heartbreak, or hope, and you'll deliver it like you always did. But what they won't hear is the ache behind it, the body behind it, the sweat and sorrow and trembling that shaped each phrase. You'll sound eternal, but you weren't. You were skin and blood, and that voice, clean now perfect in digital form, came from a man who couldn't sleep without help. But the world will keep playing you, and maybe that's okay. Maybe that's the deal. You sing, they forget, and somewhere in that forgetting your voice still carries. Somewhere out there, you're not a legend, you're not the king, you're just a voice. Not even a name, just a sound on a warm summer wind drifting through open windows. Somewhere, you're just humming. No pressure, no spotlight, just melody, like water over stone. Somewhere, you're not being quoted, or sold, or imitated. You're not being analyzed. You're not being pulled back for anniversaries. You're not on mugs, magnets, neon signs. You're not a brand. You're not a burden. You're just vibration. You're just breath in motion. And maybe that's closer to God than anything Graceland ever gave you, because in that version, you're free. Finally. No suits, no weight, no pills, no interviews. Just you and the sound, moving through space without expectation. That's where you belong now. Not frozen in memory, but moving like wind. Present without being possessed. turn out the lights now. The stage is empty, the suit is hung. The keys are quiet. The room doesn't need another story. The story is told. The work is done. No need to rewind it, no need to frame it. Let the lights dim. Let the gate close. Let the voice rest in silence. No more retrospectives, no more revisions. Let the man fade without being called back. Not out of disrespect, out of mercy. Let the ending be an ending, not another beginning, because even the brightest stars burn out, and even the loudest songs deserve to fade. Let the last sound be stillness. Let the last image be peace. Let the crowd go home. Let the myth be put down gently. Let him be. You gave us everything, your body, your sound, your smile, even when it hurt, even when it cost too much, and now we give you this, silence, finally. After all the noise, here is stillness. No questions, no more demands, just rest, deep and warm and free. Wherever you are now, may you be light. May your feet not ache, may your voice be unburdened, may your heart be quiet. You don't have to prove anything anymore, not to us, not to God, not even to yourself. We're letting go now, not because we want to forget, but because we want to love you right this time, fully, gently, without asking for anything in return. Good night, Elvis. Sleep tight. The house is dark now and no one's knocking. Good night.